Amen. We're going to open up the scriptures to Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12. I mentioned earlier, my dad kind of focused in this morning on murmuring, on anger, and then even moved into the topic of bitterness. And he didn't know that I was being led to teach on this topic as well. It's a heavy topic. Why is it a heavy topic? Because I believe we all, to some degree, struggle with this concept of bitterness. And what we'll see here together as we walk through the scriptures in this is that specifically what we'll see here in Hebrews chapter 12 is sometimes there are things that we don't see about bitterness that are taking place in our life. Hebrews 12:15, and I'll clarify that in just a second here. Hebrews 12:15 says, looking, what's the next word? Diligently. I mean, my dad emphasized the same word this morning, that with all diligence, he went to the book of Proverbs, with all diligence. And here again, the Holy Spirit instructs us as followers of Jesus, as followers of Christ, and we've been in this series on abiding in Christ, and now we've moved into a life community, and that's our relationships with one another. And in the process of us having a relationship with each other in the church or just with people in general, we're going to run across the opportunity to grow bitterness in our life. And this is something that we must look diligently, it says, lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you, and thereby many, it says, many be defiled. So, I mentioned earlier, this is something that I believe plagues a lot of people in general. There are a lot of people that are navigating life in this world, and they're full of anger, they're full of bitterness, and it's overtaken their life. Bitterness has been described this way. It's like drinking poison and hoping the other person that you have bitterness against dies. That's what bitterness is. However, this instruction gives an illustration of a root. So what are some characteristics of a root, of roots? First of all, roots are typically unseen. Roots are typically unseen. I don't typically tell you what to do, but if I had to encourage you, I would encourage you to take some notes in this. This is more of a conversational teaching in this process, and I really think that some of these things will be a help to you personally. Several years ago, I heard a message on bitterness and forgiveness, and it was based off the story of Joseph, and it so convicted me that I wrote down some things that helped me personally, and I'm still working through those things to this day. Roots are typically unseen. Secondly, roots are typically holding on to the elements below the surface. These are characteristics of roots. Roots are holding on to elements below the surface. Number three, roots are typically feeding on the sources below the surface. This is physical roots. When you look at a tree that's out here, what is unseen are the roots, the network of roots that are taking place below the surface. And sometimes you could see a massive large tree. How many of you have seen that picture, that image of like this really large tree? And then it's kind of a diagram, and then you see kind of the surface of the ground, and then you see this massive root system or root ball that's below the surface, and at times could be bigger and greater than the tree itself. Yet we don't see that. Number 4, roots grow downward and outward, spreading and growing with more and more branches. So, the instruction is given to us, let's look diligently, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you. So what is a root of bitterness? What would be a root of bitterness? I'm going to kind of describe a root of bitterness would be a hurt. You could use those words interchangeably. We think of bitterness as kind of this ugly thing that comes out, this vicious thing that's seen above the surface. But what the scriptures are talking about here is starting with the root. It's starting with below the surface, something that takes place that's unseen, that nobody else is able to observe except the Lord himself. It's a hurt, it's a pain that's below the surface. So I want you to understand that the root of bitterness is hurts. How many of you have been hurt in your life before? That's all of us. Those hurts are roots that have potential to spring into bitterness. And I want us to understand that the hurt in and of itself is not wrong that we've experienced. Obviously, the hurt that we may have experienced from somebody else, their reaction towards us was sinful. But again, this goes right along with how what my dad was talking about. But our response to the hurts and the pain in our life is what has the potential either to spring into bitterness or allow us to embrace the grace of God in our life, which is what is talked about here. Lest any man fail of the grace of God. I want us to look at an example, and he's actually given right here in this passage. And I'd never seen it before until I was looking at this passage, and then I run across this name. I'm like, why is this name thrown in here kind of randomly? So read on. This is 15. The sentence actually continues into verse number 16. So, looking diligently, lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you, and thereby many be defiled, lest there be any fornicator or profane person as Esau, who for one morsel of meat sold his birthright. So just for a little bit this morning, I want us to go back and look at this individual, this character of Esau. So we're going to go back to Genesis chapter 25. Genesis chapter 25. Roots equal hurts in our life. Roots equal hurts in our life. In Genesis 25, we pick up a story here. We know that Abraham is the father of the children of Israel. And then Abraham has a son by the name of Isaac in his old age. And then Isaac has two sons, and that's who we'll look at this morning. Genesis 25 and verse number 19. And these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begat Isaac. And Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian of Paddan Aram, the sister to Laban the Syrian. And Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife because she was barren. I just think that's a neat part of that verse there. Isaac, on behalf of his wife, prays and pleads to the Lord. And the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. And the children struggled together within her, and she said, if it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord. I love this. Isaac goes to the Lord. Rebekah is struggling. Rebekah goes to the Lord. Verse number 23, and the Lord said unto her, by the way, this is a prophecy. I don't believe this is predetermined. Does that make sense? This is a prophecy of what was to take place. I don't believe this is a predetermination by the Lord. And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels, and the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. Well, there's the prophecy fulfilled. There were twins in her womb. And the first came out red all over like an hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. Esau. So the firstborn here of these twins, I don't know if you remember that and realize that, the Esau and Jacob, you'll see here in a second, were twins. Yet Esau was just barely older than Jacob, and he comes out all hairy, like he's just got hair all over him, reddish hair all over him, and they named him Esau. And after that came his brother out, and his brother's hand, took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob, which means heel catcher. And Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. Isaac is 60 years old. And the boys grew. And Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field. And Jacob was a plain man, dwelling in tents. So I want us to see here that these 2 boys, these brothers that were growing up in this same household, yet they couldn't be any more opposite of each other when it came to their personality, when it came to their interests, when it came to their likes and dislikes. Esau was a man of the field. He was a hunter and gatherer. He went out into the woods, and in our modern day language, he would have been like a man's man. This was a tough and rough man. In fact, I think his name, Esau, the name Esau means rough. It means rough. And this is who Esau was. He was just a different personality. And his brother, on the other hand, Jacob, was a plain man, and he dwelt in tents. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with the 2 different personalities here. You can see it across the board when it comes to families, and you're like, man, how are those 2 brothers? How are those 2 siblings? You know, we're seeing it already just between River and Judah. They just have different, they're both boys, but they both have different personalities, and it's going to come out in different ways as they get a little bit older. And so for Jacob and Esau, they couldn't have been any more different than each other. And I want us to notice, actually, the first, what we're looking at is the character of Esau specifically. There's a whole study we could do on the life of Jacob. There's so much of the life of Jacob, but I want us to look specifically at the life of Esau, because it's Esau that's mentioned there in Hebrews chapter 12, and I believe it's Esau who had some things in his life, some roots, some hurts that took place in his life that came out, that sprang up into bitterness for Esau. And it started very early on in Esau's life where there was hurt that took place in Esau's life. And look at verse 28. And Isaac loved Esau. And you may say, well, that's great. That's awesome. What's so bad about that? Read on. Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Hurt number 1, or root number 1 for Esau was this. He was the victim of favoritism. He was the victim of favoritism. Well, you may say, well, his dad loved him. But how hurtful would it be for a son to grow up in his home knowing that his mother loved his sibling more than he did him? Hurt number one, he was the victim of favoritism. You can trace a lot of bitterness in the home and in other atmospheres back to favoritism. Favoritism of parents to children. Favoritism of grandparents to grandchildren. You guys know that. If you're grandkids, you're like, those grandkids always got more toys or whatever it is. They got more time to spend with grandma and grandpa, whatever it is. You, like in your mind, these are below the surface things, by the way. They're things that maybe we pass by in everyday life, and we don't realize that those are tiny little hurts. Those are roots in our life. And a lot of people are struggling and dealing with anger and bitterness in their life, and they don't realize it comes back to these roots of their home life, of their upbringing. And right off the bat here with Esau, we see he is a victim of favoritism. You have the favoritism among siblings, favoritism among cousins. You can see it in the workplace, favoritism among employees. I mean, how angry do people get when one person gets treated better than the other in the workplace? I mean, it gets vicious at times in the workplace. Favoritism is a hurt. Favoritism is a root, a potential root of bitterness. Now, I want us to understand the hurt in and of itself, again, is not bitterness. But it has the potential. When there is pain, when there is hurt, there is the opportunity for that to spring up into bitterness. Let's read on in chapter 25, jump down to verse number 29. And Jacob sawed pottage, just meant he was cooking. He's a tent dweller. He was a cook. He was making some food. And Esau came from the field, and he was faint. Again, you see the opposite personality. Esau out in the woods, hunting, gathering, finding something. Didn't at this point. He comes back, and his brother's sitting by the tent, and he's got this pot of stew is what I imagine it to be. And Esau came from the field, and he was faint. He was exhausted. He was tired. I mean, if you've been out in the outdoors at all, if you've gone hiking, camping, backpacking, whatever, you realize that the tiredness that you get from just being in the outdoors, being exhausted, the traveling, the walking, and I can't imagine what Esau did back at this time. But he comes back, and he is exhausted. The scriptures say he is tired. He is exhausted. He is faint. And Esau said to Jacob, verse 30, "Feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, for I am faint." Therefore was his name called Edom. And Jacob said, "Sell me this day thy birthright." What brother does this? "Sell me this day thy birthright." And Esau said, "Behold, I'm at the point to die." Now, that may have been an exaggeration. He was exhausted. He was absolutely tired. He may have over-exaggerated the "I'm about to die" situation. He says, "Behold, I am at the point to die, and what profit shall this birthright do to me?" And Jacob said, "Swear to me this day." And he sware unto him, and he sold his birthright unto Jacob. I want us to look at hurt number 2 for Esau. Again, we're focusing on Esau. Esau's hurt number 2 was this. He was the victim of being taken advantage of. He was the victim of being taken advantage of. We know that the name Jacob means heel catcher. And we know that Jacob, for a lot of his life, is a wheeler and dealer. You know, Esau had the brawn. Jacob probably had the brains. And he was always like conniving and deceiving and trying to get his way when it came to his older brother. And this relationship was just explosive, and there was layers there. It started with the parents. That's why it's so important as parents that we don't show favoritism among our children, that we love them with an unconditional love, no matter how they're acting and reacting, because we should have the love of Christ in us and through us. And by the way, we fail as parents in this, self-admittedly. But there should be a love that should have been shown to both children. But what happened was there was a divide in the household. There was a divide between mom and dad, and that created a divide between the two brothers here. And now it's being shown in Jacob taking advantage of Esau when Esau was exhausted and tired and hungry. He makes him swear to give up his birthright. Well, what was the significance of the birthright? First, it was a double portion of the inheritance from the father. That's what the inheritance was. The older son, there was something specific about the birthright of the order of the sons. The oldest son, after the father passed, he would receive 2/3 of the inheritance. He would receive the majority of the inheritance, and then the younger son would receive the 1/3. A special ceremonial blessing from the father. This is what fell to the oldest son. We'll cover that in just a second. He was also seen, after the death of the father, he was also seen as the head of the family, the older son, the birthright. This, of course, is not understood in our culture, but in the Eastern culture, and in many Eastern cultures to this day, this takes place. Oldest son takes over. We see it like back in Fiji, where it's kind of by age, and the grandfather passes. Well, the oldest son kind of takes over as making sure everything is overseen for the family and the gatherings and the funerals and the celebrations. The matangali. Number 4, ownership of the property after the death of the father. So this birthright was of high importance. Now we do see that Esau, in a sense, just blindly, I don't know that necessarily blindly, but he despises this birthright. But it was a result of a hurt in his life, a taking advantage of by Jacob. Jacob is basically the aggressor in this by stealing the birthright of Esau, and Esau despises it in verse 34 there. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink, and Jacob's just sitting back going, You messed up, bro. I've got the birthright. And he did eat and drink and rose up and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Flip over to chapter 27. Kind of skipping through this story, but I want us to grasp what was happening here with Esau. There's layers here. Just like there's layers of the earth where those roots are located. And for Esau, there was the hurt of favoritism. There was the hurt of being taken advantage of. Let's look at chapter 27 and verse number 1. And it came to pass that when Isaac was old, and his eyes were dim, so that he could not see, he called Esau his eldest son, and said unto him, My son. And he said unto him, Behold, here am I. And he said, Behold, now I am old, I know not the day of my death. Now therefore take, I pray thee, thy weapons, thy quiver and thy bow, and go out to the field, and take me some venison, and make me savory meat, such as I love, and bring it to me that I may eat, that my soul may bless thee before I die. And Rebekah, listen to this, and Rebekah heard when Isaac spake to Esau his son, and Esau went to the field to hunt for venison, and to bring it. And Rebekah spake unto Jacob her son, saying, Behold, I heard thy father speak unto Esau thy brother, saying, Bring me venison, and make me savory meat, that I may eat, and bless thee before the Lord, before my death. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice according to that which I command thee. Go now to the flock, and fetch me from thence 2 good kids of the goats, and I will make them savory meat for thy father, such as he loveth. And thou shalt bring it to thy father, that he may eat, and that he may bless thee before his death. And Jacob said to Rebekah his mother, Behold, Esau my brother is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. My father peradventure will feel me, and I shall seem to him as a deceiver. You are, do you think? He is a deceiver. Do you see the anomaly of what's happening here with Jacob? Do you see where Jacob got his deceiving intentions, though? Where did it come from? His mother. His mother. The mother's influence in Jacob's life. I mean, this is heartbreaking, and we'll see this is another hurt for Esau. But the fact that Rebekah overhears her husband desiring to bless the oldest son, which is Esau, the one who should receive the blessing as the oldest son, she overhears it and says, "Nuh-uh. I'm going to change this. I'm going to manipulate this into my favor because Jacob is the one that I love and I favor." And she includes her son in this process of deception to deceive her own husband. You talk about a relationship that was not based on truth, based on trust. There was deception between their relationship that passed down to the children. And she includes Jacob in this. And Jacob, being the deceiver he is himself, says, "Hey, let's take this a step further. I'm a smooth man. Esau's a hairy man. We need to do something about that." So they take the skins of goats. They place it on Jacob's arms. I mean, Esau had to be a very, very hairy man to feel like a goat skin, okay? But this is what happens. Verse number 21. Actually, look, let's pick up in verse number 17. "And she gave the savory meat and the bread which she had prepared into the hand of her son." I mean, this is a whole lot of intentional planning that's taking place here. And verse number 18, "And he came unto his father and said, My father. And he said, Here am I. Who art thou, my son?" He asked the question right off. As soon as he hears the voice, something's not right. And Jacob said unto his father, "I am Esau, thy firstborn. I have done according as thou badest me. Arise, I pray thee, sit and eat of my venison, that thy soul may bless me." And Isaac said unto his son, "How is it thou hast found it so quickly, my son?" And he said, and man, you talk about profanity here, "Because the Lord thy God brought it to me," using the Lord's name in vain. And Isaac said unto Jacob, "Come near, I pray thee, that I may feel thee, my son, whether thou be my very son Esau or not." Isaac is suspicious. And Jacob went near unto Isaac his father, and he felt him and said, "The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau." And he discerned him not, because his hands were hairy as his brother Esau's hands, so he blessed him. And he said, "Art thou my very son Esau?" And he said, again, there was another opportunity for Jacob to come clean, to be honest. Jacob follows through with the deception. He says, "I am." And he said, "Bring it near to me, and I will eat of my son's venison, that my soul may bless thee." And he brought it near to him, and he did eat, and he brought him wine, and he drank. And I just want to kind of throw this in here, because and we may do this at some point, look at the life of Jacob specifically. In this instance, his father asks him, "What is your name?" And he responds with Esau. There's another instance where Jacob is wrestling with a man all night. And at the end of it, the man that was wrestling with him, which we find out later is God, asked Jacob, "What is thy name? What is your name?" And at that point, Jacob had nothing to hide. He couldn't pretend to be somebody else. He was wrestling with God himself. God touches him on the hollow of his thigh. Jacob would have a limp for the rest of his life. And God changed his name at that point. That's a whole nother story. And we'll probably study it at some point. Beautiful story of Jacob. But Jacob, when we look at this story, Jacob's not the innocent party in this. Jacob is not innocent at all. He is full of deceit and lies and manipulation. He's going after his brother, and his mother is part of this plot. He goes in, he lies to his father. He pretends that he is Esau. Isaac blesses him. Verse 26, "And his father said unto him, Come near now, and kiss me, my son. And he came near, and kissed him, and he smelled the smell of his raiment, and blessed him, and said, See, the smell of my son is as the smell of the field which the Lord hath blessed. Therefore God give thee of the dew of heaven, and of the fatness thereof, and plenty of corn and wine. Let people serve thee, and nations bow down to thee. Be Lord over thy brethren. Let thy mother's sons bow down to thee. Cursed be everyone that curseth thee, and blessed be he that blesseth thee. And it came to pass, as soon as Isaac had made an end of blessing Jacob, and Jacob was yet scarce gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, that Esau his brother came in from his hunting. And he also had made savory meat, and brought it unto his father, and said unto his father, Let my father arise, and eat of his son's venison, that thy soul may bless me. And Isaac his father said unto him, Who art thou? And I imagine his voice is trembling. And he said, I am thy son, thy firstborn Esau. And Isaac trembled very exceedingly, and said, Where is he that hath taken venison, and brought it to me? And I have eaten of all before thou camest, and have blessed him, yea, and he shall be blessed. And when Esau heard the words of his father, he cried. Look at it. Look at the hurt. Look at the pain. He cried. He's weeping here. And he cried. An exceeding and what? Bitter cry. You see, the roots of bitterness is hurts in our life. And Esau had been hurt. Esau had hurt upon hurt upon hurt. He is crying now a bitter cry. And when Esau heard the words, he cried with a great and exceeding bitter cry, and said unto his father, Bless me, even me also, O my father. And he said, Thy brother came with subtlety, and hath taken away thy blessing. And Esau responds with it, Is he not rightly named Jacob, meaning heel catcher? For he hath supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he hath taken away my blessing. And he said, Hast thou not reserved a blessing for me? And Isaac answered and said unto Esau, Behold, I have made him thy Lord, and all his brethren have I given to him for servants. With corn and wine have I sustained him. And what shall I do now unto thee, my son? And Esau said unto his father, Hast thou but one blessing? My father, bless me even now unto thee. Oh, me also, my father. And I mean, I just imagine him crying. This is a grown man. He's crying to his dad, Please give me something. And Esau said unto his father, Hast thou but one blessing? Look at verse 39. And Isaac his father answered and said unto him, Behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth, and of the dew of the heaven from above. And by thy sword shalt thou live, and shalt serve thy brother. And it shall come to pass, when thou shalt have the dominion, that thou shalt break his yoke from off thy neck. And look at this word. And Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, The days of mourning of my father are at hand, and then will I slay or kill my brother Jacob. I want us to see here hurt number 3, or root number 3, is he was the victim of deception, or the victim of being stabbed in the back. I want us to understand this principle. Hurt leads to anger. Anger leads to bitterness. Bitterness leads to a cold heart. And a cold heart leads to the hurting of other people. You've heard the statement maybe before that says, hurt people. Hurt people. You've heard that? Because hurt people, after they've experienced hurt, from somebody else. I want us to notice with Esau here, this was somebody else's sin that was affecting Esau personally. And I know for you and I, we have people in our life who have hurt us deeply, who've hurt us personally, who've shown through their actions and through their sin and through their choices have hurt us very deeply. And those hurts, I want us to go back to Hebrews 12 and think about that, to look diligently at those hurts, to inspect, to make sure that that hurt, that root doesn't spring up into bitterness. Because what happens when we allow that hurt to overtake us, to spring into anger, and then anger into bitterness, is then we have this cold heart, and we can no longer hear the voice of God. We can no longer hear the still voice of the Spirit in our lives. And there are many Christians, followers of Christ, who are living their lives cold-hearted towards God because of the hurts and the pains that they've experienced in their life. And I don't want that for you, and I don't want that for me. And it starts with us recognizing these hurts. Hurt leads to anger. Anger leads to bitterness. Bitterness leads to a cold heart. A cold heart leads to the hurting of other people. I'll give you 4 practical steps when dealing with hurt, and we'll close this morning. Firstly, recognize the hurt. Pretending that it did not happen is not helping you. You've got to recognize it. Acknowledge it. Acknowledge it as sin. It's okay to acknowledge it as sin. Somebody did this to me. It was hurtful and it was wrong. Recognize it. Secondly, this is so important. We recognize the hurt, but then secondly, we release the right to retaliate. Flip over to Romans chapter 12. Many of us can't even begin to consider the word forgiveness because we've never actually addressed the roots, the hurts in the process. Like, forgiveness just sounds like you just want to barf, doesn't it? Like, you're just like, what? Oh, we just need to forgive him. And I despise when someone just treats it trivially, like, yeah, just forgive and forget. First of all, we don't have that ability within and of ourselves. We do not have the ability to forgive, and we definitely don't have the ability to forget. This comes only by the grace, and that's why it says in Hebrews 12, lest any man fail of the grace of God. You know what the grace of God is? It's His strength. It's His power in and throughout our lives. So first of all, though, we have to recognize the hurt that has taken place in our life and then release the right to retaliate. Romans chapter 12, verse number 17 says this, recompense to no man evil for evil. Provide things honest in the sight of all men. Do you see that it says evil? Recompense to no man evil for evil. That means there was evil done. Recognize that. Provide things honest in the sight of all men. If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. That means sometimes that can't take place. You do with what's within your power to live peaceably with all men. But can you live peaceably with all men? No. Dearly beloved, this is what Paul was directing the early Christians here. He said, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I will repay, saith the Lord. I will repay. In the context here, and we're going to continue this story next week. We've looked this morning at the root of bitterness. Next week we'll look at the fruit of bitterness. In the story of Jacob, when it comes to the Lord will repay, God dealt with Jacob. God dealt with Jacob in a very hard way. And Esau, although he was hurt, although he was full of pain and had been betrayed and had these hurts that had been taken advantage of, the deception that all had come towards him. Do you know that Jacob was also deceived later by his own sons? In the story of Joseph, Jacob's sons sell Joseph into slavery. Joseph is sold, and the brothers find his coat. They take his coat, and they dip it in blood. And they bring it to their father, Jacob. Do you know what type of blood they dipped that coat of many colors into? It was goat's blood. It was almost like God saying, hey, I saw exactly what you did, Jacob. And that's why the vengeance side is not up to us. God is the one that deals with the consequences of other people's actions. What we have to do in order to find healing for our hearts and our souls is to recognize the hurt, release the right to retaliate. Thirdly, request help from God. And then fourthly, remain receptive to reconciliation. Remain receptive to reconciliation. You say, I don't think that's even a possibility. That's what we'll talk a little bit about next week as we look at the fruit of bitterness and then facing forgiveness. And it may seem like a giant for us, for you in your life. But through the power and strength of God, if we were to go back and look at Hebrews chapter 12, let's close there actually. Hebrews 12. This is where we started this morning, but back down in verse number 15, looking diligently. Look at verse number 1 of chapter 12. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. What does verse 2 say? Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. If I had any encouragement to you this morning, as we end kind of on a cliffhanger and come back next week, is look to Jesus. Look to Jesus for help, for strength. Say, you can be honest with them. Say, God, I don't even know if I can start touching this area of my life. It's so painful, so hurtful. And just give that to God and then leave it there. Don't try to fix it. Don't try to address it. Don't try to navigate all of it. Just say, God, there you go. You know that the Holy Spirit is able to decipher even our groanings, our utterings when we don't have the words to even be able to say anything. And that's where you and I can come this morning and say, God, here you go. I've been dealing with this for so long, and I just want to look to